My fiancé looked across the table in Prague and said, "I'm wondering if marriage will change who I am." I told her curiosity deserves honesty, canceled our venue booking the following day, and quietly redirected my future toward opportunities waiting beyond our plans. "I'm wondering if marriage will change who I am." She said it the way you say something you've been rehearsing for weeks, but want to sound like it just came to you. Casual, offhand, like she was commenting on the temperature above the Charles Bridge and not dismantling 4 years. I put my fork down. I set it across the plate very carefully, the way you do something small and deliberate when the thing happening around you is large and not deliberate at all. The candle between us kept burning. The restaurant noise kept going. Low chatter, the clink of glasses, a couple laughing softly 2 tables over. And I sat very still, thinking, if that question is the most honest thing she said in months, what exactly does everything else she said actually mean? Her name was Nora. We'd been together 4 years, engaged for 11 months. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I was 34. She was 31. The restaurant was tucked into a cobblestone alley just off Old Town Square in Prague, the kind of place that looks like someone assembled it from a vintage postcard and charged accordingly for the atmosphere. Low ceilings, dark wood, candles and glass holders on every table. A guitarist in the corner playing something slow and European that made the whole scene feel more cinematic than any real conversation deserves to be. We were supposed to be celebrating. Her promotion had come through 2 weeks before the trip, a senior director role she'd been working toward for the better part of 3 years. I had suggested Prague specifically because she'd mentioned it once, more than 2 years ago, the way people mention things they half mean and expect you to forget. A passing reference at a dinner party. "I've always wanted to go to Prague in autumn," she'd said. Something about the light there. I had quietly filed that away. The way you file away the small, specific things that matter to you about a person. That was the version of me sitting at that table in Prague. The version of her sitting across from me, apparently, had some questions. I didn't say anything at first. I picked up my wine glass and held it without drinking. I needed a second with the weight of what she'd said before I said anything back. "What do you mean?" I finally asked. She looked at me in this particular way she had, not unkind, but carefully assembled, like she was monitoring my reception of her in real time. "I mean exactly what I said," she replied. "I'm wondering whether, once we get married, I'll still feel like myself." I nodded once. Slowly. "That's a reasonable thing to wonder," I said. And I meant it genuinely. Marriage is a significant restructuring of identity and daily life, and I have never believed that pretending otherwise is honesty. But there was something in the way she'd said it, the phrasing, the timing, the particular evening she'd chosen, 11 days before we were supposed to finalize the last major vendor payment for our venue. That told me this conversation had a destination I wasn't going to enjoy arriving at. "It's not just wondering," she said then. There it was. I set the wine glass down. "Okay," I said. She leaned forward slightly. Her hands moved around her own glass without lifting it. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want the next chapter of my life to look like. And I keep running into this feeling, this recurring feeling, that I haven't fully figured out who I am yet. Not in the way I'd need to, in order to make a forever commitment feel right." I let that land fully. I let every word of it settle before I responded. "How long have you been sitting with this?" I asked. She looked at the candle for a moment. "A few months," she said. "A few months." I kept my face neutral. Our save the dates had gone out 5 months ago. I had flown both our families to a formal engagement dinner 4 months ago. I had taken 3 weeks off from a significant project opportunity in Copenhagen, a real, career-defining kind of opportunity, the kind that comes from 15 years of building a very specific professional reputation, because the timing had overlapped with our venue deposit deadline, and I had chosen, without hesitation, to stay. A few months. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt yet. That came later, privately, in ways I'll describe. What I felt first was something quieter and stranger than both of those things. It was the feeling of understanding all at once that the architecture you thought you were standing inside has been a different structure than you believed. That the walls you'd been leaning on were painted onto canvas. That you'd been counting on load-bearing elements that weren't actually load-bearing. Nora is, a genuinely thoughtful person. That's part of what made this disorienting. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't careless in the ordinary sense. But she had held this for months without a word, and while she held it, I had been making decisions. Real decisions. Permanent ones, or close enough to permanent. Decisions with financial costs and professional costs, and the deeper, harder to quantify cost of redirected momentum. I appreciate you telling me, I said. She looked slightly surprised. Maybe relieved. Maybe both. I wasn't sure how you'd react, she admitted. I'm not reacting yet, I said. I'm listening. She nodded. I love you, she said carefully. I want you to know that. This isn't about you. It's more about Nora, I said gently. She stopped. When someone says it's not about you in the context of reconsidering marriage, it is at least partly about me, I said. That's okay. But let's not do that particular thing. She looked at the table for a moment. Fair, she said quietly. The guitarist in the corner shifted into something slower and more melancholy. I poured myself more wine, and I said something I genuinely meant, that I hadn't planned, that arrived from somewhere honest in me. Curiosity deserves honesty. Whatever you're trying to figure out, the least I can give you is a real conversation. Not defensiveness. Not a performance of being okay with things I'm not okay with. A real one. She looked at me for a long moment, like she hadn't expected that particular response. Honestly, I hadn't fully expected it from myself either. We talked for 2.5 hours. The restaurant slowly emptied around us, and neither of us moved. At some point, a waiter brought a dessert we hadn't ordered with a small note wishing us a pleasant evening, which was either good service or terrible timing, depending on how you look at it. What emerged from that conversation, piece by piece, the way things emerge when people stop managing each other and start saying the actual things, was something I had sensed for a long time, but had never allowed into full focus. Nora had spent the last year of our relationship quietly negotiating with herself. Not about whether she loved me. She was clear on that, and I believed her. But about a version of her own life she felt she hadn't fully inhabited. She had met me at 27. Before me, she had spent 2 years living and working in Lisbon. She'd had a studio flat near the river, a job at a small design consultancy, a loose and unstructured life built entirely around what sounded interesting to her at any given moment. She had stayed out until 3 in the morning because she felt like it. She had booked last-minute flights with friends and left for a week with 2 days' notice. She had eaten dinner at midnight and slept until noon on Saturdays and felt absolutely no obligation to organize herself around anyone else's schedule or anyone else's needs. She described that time the way people describe a country they used to live in, with warmth and longing and a very specific kind of grief that tells you the leaving wasn't entirely voluntary. I'm not that person anymore, she said. I know you probably think that's growth. And maybe it is. But sometimes I wonder if I traded her in too fast. Before I really understood what she was. I watched her as she spoke. I noticed things I hadn't let myself notice before. The way her face changed when she talked about Lisbon. Lighter, more open, less calculated. The way the carefully assembled expression she'd worn all evening fell away when she wasn't managing my reaction and was just talking. And the thing that kept drawing my attention, the thing that mattered, the thing that made everything fall into place, was that she never once described a version of this that included me. When she talked about the autonomy she wanted to test, the open-ended chapters she hadn't finished, the life she was curious about, I was never a character in any of those sentences. Not a supporting one. Not even a background detail. She wasn't asking me to change. She was asking herself whether she wanted this at all. The entire architecture of what I had believed about our shared future quietly, completely, reorganized itself somewhere in my chest. I asked one direct question before we left that restaurant. Do you want to get married to anyone right now? She didn't answer immediately. She took a breath and looked at the table. I don't know, she said. I don't know if I want to marry you. I don't know if I want to get married. Those are different statements. One is about me. One is about her. And I had enough respect for both of us to understand that the second kind of uncertainty is not something you marry into, and hope resolves itself naturally on the other side of the ceremony. Hope is not a structural material. We walked back to the hotel along the river. The city was quiet in the way European cities get after midnight. A specific, centuries-old stillness that makes you feel both very small and very present. She held my arm. I let her. And I remember thinking, very clearly and without drama, this is probably one of the last times this will feel like it used to feel. Not because I had decided anything definitive yet, but because the truth, once it surfaces, doesn't go back down. It changes the pressure of everything around it. The next morning, I woke before she did. I made coffee from the hotel machine and took it to the chair by the window. The Prague rooftops were silver in the early light. Church spires and terracotta tiles, and the distant outline of the castle on the hill. I sat with the coffee and thought with the kind of clear-eyed precision that only comes after you've processed something overnight and stopped arguing with it. Here is what I knew. I loved Nora. I had loved her completely, not performatively, for 4 years. I had built real plans around that love, not fantasies, not just projections, but actual structural decisions with actual costs. The flat we were due to start viewing the following week. We'd been pre-approved for a mortgage jointly, had already contacted an estate agent. The Copenhagen project, a sustainable urban housing consultation I had spent 18 months quietly positioning myself for, let go of, without ceremony, because the timing had conflicted with our venue deposit deadline, and I had made the call without grieving it. The senior partner who'd approached me had been gracious when I declined. He had told me, in the measured tone of a man who's seen this before, that these opportunities have windows, and windows don't stay open indefinitely. I had nodded and told him I had my priorities sorted. I had believed that completely when I said it. Sitting by that Prague hotel window, I thought about that conversation with a clarity I hadn't allowed myself before. I also thought about something that had been accumulating quietly, in the background, for longer than I'd been willing to admit. I thought about the version of me that had been slowly, incrementally contracting. Not because Nora had asked for it. She hadn't demanded anything of the kind. But relationships have a gravity, and I had allowed ours to pull me into an orbit where everything was planned around a center point that, as of last night, had said it wasn't sure it wanted to be a center point at all. That is not a blame statement. That is physics. Gravity doesn't need intention. It just needs mass and proximity. She woke around 9. We didn't say much over breakfast. Not from coldness, from the particular shared exhaustion of people who have been genuinely honest with each other for the first time in a long time and need the morning to absorb the weight of it. She ordered eggs and looked at her phone. I drank 2 coffees and stared at a menu I didn't eat from. At some point she looked up and said, "Are you okay?" "I'm thinking," I said. "About what?" she asked. I met her eyes. "About what's honest," I said. She put her phone face down on the table. "Tell me," she said. And I did. I told her I'd heard everything she said the night before, and that I believed all of it. I told her I didn't think she was a bad person, and I didn't think she had misled me deliberately. I told her I thought she had been trying to outrun her own uncertainty, hoping it would resolve itself before it had to become a conversation. I told her I understood that impulse entirely. And then I said the part that mattered most. I can't marry someone who isn't sure, I said. Not because I don't love you, but because marrying you when you feel like this would be the least loving thing I could do. For either of us. She didn't cry. She held my gaze for a very long time with an expression I still don't have a clean word for. It was somewhere between relief and grief. Like she had been bracing herself for something sharp, and sharp didn't come, and the absence of it hit her harder than the sharp would have. "I didn't want you to cancel everything," she said softly. "That's not what I was asking for." "I know," I said. "I was just trying to be honest with you," she said. "I know that too," I said, "and I'm grateful for it. But the honesty and the wedding date can't both exist in the same plan, Nora. They want different things from the same future." She was quiet for a moment. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We finish the trip," I said, "and then we go home and deal with what's real." We had 4 days left in Prague. We used them, not as a couple trying to reclaim something, not as 2 people performing normalcy for each other, but as what we actually were at that point. 2 people who had genuinely loved each other and were being honest about what that love could and couldn't hold. We visited the castle on the hill on the 3rd day. We stood in the courtyard and looked out at the city below, which looked from up there like something painted rather than lived in. We walked across the bridge in the cold morning with our hands in our separate pockets. We had dinner at a small, quiet place with no guitarist and no ambient romance, and talked about other things: her new role, a book she'd been reading, an unusual architectural project I'd seen written up in a trade journal the previous month. The conversation was easy in a way our conversations hadn't been easy for a while, because we both stopped managing. That does something specific to the air between people, removing the management, removing the performance of everything being fine. It lightens, even when what replaces the performance is something weighted. On our second to last evening, she said, "You're being very calm about all of this. I genuinely don't understand it." "I'm not calm underneath," I said. "I'm just done spending energy on things I can't change." She thought about that. "Did you know?" she asked. "Before that night, did some part of you know something was wrong?" I took a breath. Some part of me knew something wasn't right, I said. I didn't know the exact shape of it, but there was, yes, something. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. Because I was hoping to be wrong, I said. She nodded slowly. I was hoping the same thing, she said. We looked at each other across that table. Two people who had both been hoping to be wrong about the same thing, from opposite directions, for months. The morning we flew home, she reached for my hand at the departure gate. I held it, not because it meant what it used to mean, but because 4 years is 4 years, and some things deserve a quiet goodbye rather than a sharp one. Some things deserve to be held a final time before you put them down. On the plane, she fell asleep on my shoulder for the first hour. I stayed awake and looked at the seat pocket in front of me and thought about all the invisible, incremental ways I had arranged my life around someone who had been quietly, honestly reconsidering. Not out of cruelty, out of the most ordinary kind of human confusion, the kind that doesn't announce itself, that masquerades as normal ambivalence, that feels manageable until one honest conversation in Prague makes it suddenly, completely legible. I thought about the beginning of us. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday, one of those gatherings that exists in London on a Saturday night in October when people are not quite ready for winter and still hoping the year has something good left in it. Nora had been standing near the window talking to someone I didn't know, and the first thing I had noticed about her was that she was listening with her whole face. Not performing listening, actually doing it. We had talked for 2 hours that night without moving from our corner of the room. She was thoughtful in a way that felt effortless rather than calculated, curious about the world in a way that made her interesting to be around, opinionated in the specific sense of having actual opinions rather than positions she'd borrowed from other people. I had liked her immediately and completely. That hadn't changed, honestly. Not even at that table in Prague. Not even after everything she'd said. I was on that plane, 30,000 feet above a Europe I couldn't see, and I still liked her. That's the part of love stories that doesn't make it into the telling. The way you can completely understand that something is over and still genuinely like the person. Still wish them all the best things without reservation. Still feel the warmth of what they were to you. Even as you also feel the unmistakable cold clarity of what has to happen next. And I thought about something my older brother had said to me on a call about 6 months earlier. His name is Conrad. He's based in Zurich now, works in finance. The most practically minded person I have ever known. Which means he tends to say the important things without decorating them and then trust you to figure out the decorations yourself. We'd been talking, and I was telling him I'd turned down the Copenhagen project. He'd gone quiet for a moment. That particular silence he has before he says something he's not entirely sure will land the right way. Are you building a life? He asked. Or are you building around a life? I had deflected. I had changed the subject with the kind of practiced ease that tells you, later, that the subject had found a nerve you weren't ready to look at. 30,000 feet above whatever country was beneath us, Nora asleep on my shoulder, I let that question arrive fully for the first time. I had been building around a life. Not mine. The venue cancellation call happened the morning after we landed. I had read through the contract terms on the flight home, located the relevant clause, calculated the forfeiture amount, and made peace with the number before I picked up the phone. The venue coordinator was professional and measured and only mildly surprised. She told me later in the call, almost casually, that these calls happen more often than most people would assume. She walked me through the process. I confirmed the financial details. I thanked her, and she wished me well in a tone that was neither warm nor cold, just competent. The call lasted 9 minutes. 9 minutes to formally undo 11 months of planning. There is a particular quality of silence in an apartment after you've made a call like that. I sat down on my kitchen floor. I do this sometimes, when I need to be low to the ground to think clearly, which I've never been able to fully explain, but which has always worked. And I made a list. Not a dramatic list. A functional one. Things to cancel. The venue, the photographer whose portfolio I had spent 3 weekends researching, the florist, the catering consultation scheduled for the following month. People to tell, both families, close friends, the colleagues who'd already blocked out the date in their diaries. Things to reconsider, the apartment viewings we'd scheduled, the mortgage pre-approval process we'd started, the estate agent who'd been sending us listings. And then, at the bottom of the list, a category I wrote as redirected. Under that heading, I wrote one name. A firm in Stockholm that had made a soft approach to me 8 months earlier, which I had politely deferred. I found the contact details. I sat on the kitchen floor and wrote an email. It was the most honest thing I had written in a year. Telling our families was the hardest part. Not because they were angry. They largely weren't, at least not to my face. But because of the specific, particular grief that family members carry on your behalf when something they'd gotten excited about doesn't happen. When they'd imagined a future for you, and that future has been quietly replaced by a different one. My mother took it in the contained, precise way she takes most difficult things. Very few words. A small number of careful questions. Then, I love you. I trust you to know what's right. That was more painful, somehow, than tears would have been. Because it meant she believed me, and she wasn't going to argue. And the absence of argument left the full weight of the decision sitting entirely with me, which is exactly where it belonged and exactly where it was heaviest. Nora's family, I heard secondhand, was more reactive initially. Her father had apparently spent 20 minutes on the phone asking her to pause rather than cancel. Her mother had been quieter and had said something to Nora that I found, when Nora mentioned it to me, deeply interesting. I've been wondering about this for a while, she'd said. Mothers, they always seem to know. Our mutual friends fell into the predictable patterns. Some took Nora's side publicly and vocally. Some took mine. Most of the genuinely good ones refused the whole concept of sides and simply kept checking in on both of us independently. My closest friend, a man I've known since we were 20 years old, an architect who now runs his own practice out of Rotterdam, called within an hour of me texting him the news. His name is Tobias. His particular model of friendship involves zero performance, no comfortable reassurances, and extremely direct questions delivered at exactly the right moment. What are you going to do? He asked. Move, I said. A pause. Where? He asked. Stockholm, maybe, I said. There's a firm. Another pause. How long have you been sitting on that? He asked. 8 months, I said. Right, he said. And then, silence. For about 30 seconds. Tobias understands that some silences are more supportive than words. Then, let me know if you need a couch while you sort the logistics. That was the most useful conversation I had during the entire first week. I want to talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough in these kinds of stories. The grief of grieving something that was never a catastrophe. When relationships end because of betrayal or cruelty or some dramatic rupture, there's a narrative structure available to you. There's a clear cause, a wound with edges, something to point to and name. But when it ends because two people were honest about what they needed and what they weren't certain about, there's no such structure. There's just a large, shapeless thing sitting in the center of your life where something else used to be. And you can't even be angry at it, not cleanly, because it didn't do anything wrong. I grieved Nora properly. I want to say that clearly. I didn't compress it into productivity or repackage it as anger so it would be easier to carry. I sat with the actual sadness. The mornings that felt wrong in a way I couldn't immediately locate. The reflex to pick up my phone to send her something funny followed by the delayed recognition that the person I was reaching for wasn't reachable in the same way anymore. The dinners we'd shared. The specific laugh she had at bad wordplay. The way she made tea in the mornings. Precisely 3 minutes steep. Always the same mug. Always placed on the left side of whatever surface was near her. The whole domestic texture of 4 years of someone's consistent presence. That doesn't disappear cleanly. It fades in an uneven way that has its own rhythm. Some of it fades fast because it was tied to the idea of the future and the future changed. Some of it fades slowly because it was tied to real moments, and real moments don't care about what happened later. They just exist, unchangeably. I gave myself about 6 weeks of not trying to be okay. Just not trying. Getting up, going to work, doing the thing directly in front of me, going home, sitting with whatever was there that evening, not rushing any of it, not managing it into something more acceptable or more narrative, just letting it be the exact size it actually was. Tobias called once a week. Conrad called from Zurich every Sunday. I let them. The Stockholm firm replied to my email within 48 hours. Not with a standard acknowledgement, with a direct request for a call. The director's name was Petra. She was exactly the kind of professional I find genuinely energizing to be in a room with, direct and precise. Comfortable with both silence and ambiguity, passionate about the specific corner of sustainable urban architecture that I had spent the better part of a decade making my name in. We talked for an hour and 20 minutes on a Thursday afternoon. She had been following 3 projects I'd contributed to over the previous 5 years. And she mentioned specific decisions I had made within those projects. Not the credited ones, not the headline choices, but the smaller structural and material decisions that only someone who had actually studied the work carefully would notice. I cannot fully describe what that felt like. After months of living inside a life that had been slowly arranged around someone else's timeline and someone else's uncertainty, being seen clearly, being seen for work I had actually done, choices I had actually made, felt like standing up after kneeling for a long time. Nothing dramatic, just restored vertical. She told me the firm was beginning a significant new phase of Scandinavian urban development projects, and that my background in sustainable structure consultation was, in her words, difficult to replicate in the current market. She told me there was a senior role that hadn't been publicly posted yet. She asked whether I'd be open to a longer, more detailed conversation about it. I said yes before the sentence was finished. I want to tell you about something I've been thinking about since all of this happened. Something that doesn't usually make it into stories like this one because it's harder to dramatize than a restaurant confrontation or a canceled booking. In the months before Prague, I had started to feel something I didn't have clean language for. Not unhappiness, not doubt exactly. Something more like the feeling of standing in a room and slowly becoming aware that the room has been shrinking. Not suddenly, not in any one dramatic moment, but gradually, wall by wall. Over the course of years, the space available to you has gotten smaller, and you adapt to it so incrementally, with so many small, rational justifications that you don't notice until one day you reach for something and discover there isn't room. I had a mentor once, years before I met Nora. His name was Professor Havel, not related to the playwright. He used to joke, though he had the same steady gaze and the same patience with difficult truths. He was an extraordinary architect, still working at 70, had been married and divorced twice, and was in what he described as the most well-designed relationship of my life, because we drew up the plans honestly this time, before we started building. He told me once, in a way that felt less like advice and more like something he was working out himself in real time. The most dangerous thing in a long relationship is not conflict. It's accommodation. Conflict forces honesty, he said. But accommodation teaches you to need less than you actually do. And you start to confuse that with becoming a better person. He paused. It is not becoming a better person, he said. It is becoming a smaller one. I had written that down. In a notebook. The same one I kept for project ideas and observations I didn't want to lose. I dug that notebook out of a box after Prague and found that page. And I thought, he was right, and I had understood it intellectually for years, and I had still managed to do exactly the thing he warned against. I had become very, very good at needing less than I did. At reframing sacrifice as maturity. At calling the Copenhagen decision, getting my priorities right, rather than what it actually was. Trading my own trajectory for someone else's comfort and timeline. The thing is, Nora never asked me to make that trade. She didn't demand it, suggest it, or even notice I was making it. That's the most complicated part of accommodation. It's entirely self-administered. You do it out of love, or out of fear of losing the thing you love, or out of some interwoven combination of the two that is genuinely impossible to separate cleanly after the fact. And then one evening in a restaurant in Prague, the person you built it all around says, I don't know if I want this. And all the accommodation just sits there. All those quietly redirected choices. All those closed windows. All those things you filed away under later, until later became now, and now was no longer the right container for any of it. And the question the accommodation asks, sitting there, patient, not angry, just present, is, well, now what? I met Nora once more, about 5 weeks after we returned from Prague. Coffee, near her office, neutral territory. She looked well. Not artificially well, not performing it, but genuinely clearer. The careful, assembled quality she'd carried for months, that quiet management of how she was being perceived, was largely gone. She looked more like herself. Or more precisely, she looked like someone in the active process of discovering who that is, and choosing to be at peace with not yet knowing. We talked for about an hour. There was no drama in it. No revisiting what had been decided. No attempt from either side to reopen what was closed. She mentioned a trip she was planning. South America. She'd been looking at Argentina, possibly Patagonia specifically. She described it with a particular brightness in her voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. You should go, I said. I think I'm going to, she said. At some point she asked about me. I told her about Stockholm, the firm, the role, the offer. Her eyes widened slightly. You're moving, she said. I think so, I said. If the timing comes together the way it's looking, yes. She was quiet for a moment. That's a big thing, she said. It is, I agreed. Are you nervous? She asked. I thought about it honestly. No, I said. For the first time in a while, not particularly. She smiled at that. A real smile. Uncomplicated, genuine, for a person she cared about who was moving towards something right for them. I smiled back, and we said goodbye in the street outside the cafe, briefly and without ceremony, in the way of two people who have completed something and know it. The Stockholm role was confirmed on a Thursday, 7 weeks after Prague. I was in my flat, the flat I had been about to trade for a larger one I was going to share with someone who was, at that same moment, somewhere planning a trip to Patagonia, when the email came through. I read it 3 times. Then I called Conrad. He picked up on the second ring, which is unusual for him during working hours. The Stockholm thing, I said. Yes, he said. It came through. It's confirmed. A pause. Okay, he said. And then, quietly. Good. Just that. Not congratulations. Not excitement. Good. That single word landed harder than any celebration would have. Because it wasn't about the job. It was about his brother choosing a direction again. Moving toward rather than around. Good. Telling people about the move happened gradually, over the following 2 weeks. Most reactions were some version of surprise followed by rapid recalculation. People fitting the new information into their revised understanding of who I was becoming. A few were quietly uncomfortable. Not from malice, from the specific discomfort of a narrative that doesn't supply a villain. When a story like this one doesn't have a villain, people sometimes try to supply one themselves. Some suggested Nora had wasted my time. Some suggested I had given up too easily. One acquaintance, not a close friend, told me seriously that real commitment means staying even when it's hard. I looked at him for a moment. It wasn't hard, I said. It was clear. Those are different things. He didn't know what to do with that. So he nodded and let the subject go. The people whose opinions I actually valued understood, without requiring explanation. Tobias came to stay the weekend before I left. We had dinner and drank more wine than was strictly responsible and spent most of the time arguing about structural design principles in the way we have argued about structural design principles since we were 20 years old. We said very little about any of the things this story has been about. We didn't need to. On his last evening, he said, "You look different." Different how? I asked. He considered it carefully, the way Tobias considers things before he says them. Like there's more of you, he said. I didn't respond immediately. I walked home that night thinking about those 4 words. More of you. That is, I think, the most accurate description of everything that happened. Not that my life got better or worse in any simple, accountable sense, but that I stopped taking up less space than I was supposed to take up. I stopped filing important things away under later. I stopped calling contraction by other names. And slowly, imperfectly, with all the uneven pacing that real things have, the life I was living and the life I actually wanted started pointing in the same direction. I left on a Tuesday morning in early November. The flat was emptier than I expected once the boxes were gone. Spaces always look strange once you clear them of the things that made them yours. Larger in some ways, smaller in others, simultaneously familiar and foreign. I did one last walk through every room. Not sentimental, just final. Closing a chapter with full awareness, not looking away. The taxi to the airport was quiet. The driver had something low and instrumental on the radio. The morning was overcast in the honest, unhurried way autumn mornings in Northern Europe get. Not sad, just real. I had my project portfolio on my laptop, the Stockholm brief in my bag, a carry-on with everything I needed for the first month until the rest of my things arrived by freight. I sat in the back of that taxi and felt something I want to try to describe with accuracy, because it matters. It wasn't excitement exactly, though there was some of that. It wasn't relief, though there was some of that too. It was something more like alignment. The sensation of your actual life and your intended life finally pointing at the same thing. The feeling of having room around you again. Space to extend your arms without the walls. The feeling of being a person who has choices, rather than a person who has gradually, quietly run out of them without noticing when it happened. I thought about the restaurant in Prague. The low ceilings and dark wood, and the candle burning between us like nothing had changed. I thought about her question. I'm wondering if marriage will change who I am. And I thought about what I now understand that question was actually saying underneath itself. I'm afraid of losing the parts of me that aren't ready to be committed yet. I understand that completely. The difference is this. She asked that question about marriage. I should have been asking it about accommodation. Because the thing that changes who you are isn't commitment. It's the slow, voluntary narrowing of yourself that you allow in the name of commitment before you've even made it. That's what changes you. That's what you have to watch. I have been in Stockholm for just over 3 months now. The work is difficult and genuinely good. Petra is exactly as direct in person as she was on the call, which I appreciate without reservation. The team is sharp and driven in the particular way that people are when they're doing work they've chosen rather than work they've settled for. There's an energy in rooms like that, a particular quality of attention that I'd forgotten was possible to be part of. The city is beautiful in the way that northern cities tend to be beautiful, functional, unsentimental, built around the actual conditions of human life rather than the performance of ideal versions of it. It doesn't try to impress you. It just is what it is. I find that deeply restful. I have a flat near the water, 2 floors up, 1 large window facing east, a kitchen that's slightly too small, but has good light in the mornings. The building is older than anything I lived in before, and it has the particular character that older buildings have. The way they hold temperature, the way the sounds move, the sense of being inside something that has been inhabited by many different lives over a very long time. I appreciate that now in a way I don't think I would have before. The understanding that things can hold many different lives and remain standing. The windows face east, and the mornings here have a quality of light I haven't encountered quite like it anywhere else. Pale and clear and very honest. The way places feel honest when they don't try to flatter you. I run most mornings along the waterfront, even in the cold, which is considerable. The cold hits my face in a way that still feels, inexplicably but consistently, like being reminded I am here. Present. Awake. Occupying a life I chose, moving towards something I want, with nothing quietly shrinking me from the inside. That sounds simple. It is not simple, but it is true. I have not started dating again. Not because I've given up on that idea. I haven't. Not at all. And I know that will change when the time is right. But because I am, for the first time in a genuinely long time, interested in the question of who I am when I'm not building anything around someone else. What I want when no one else's needs are in the equation. What I notice about the world when I'm not managing my perception of it for an audience of one. There is something to learn in that space. Something that accommodation had been teaching me to forget. I am learning it back. Tobias visited last month. We walked around the city for 2 days, got into our usual arguments about structural choices and the ethics of certain material uses, ate excellent food at a small place I'd found near the port that has no menu. Just whatever they're making that day, brought to you without being asked. Tobias approved, which is not something Tobias gives easily when it comes to food or architecture. On his last evening, standing on the waterfront in the cold dark with the water moving below us and the city lit up across the inlet, he said, "You should have done this years ago." "Probably," I said. "The Copenhagen thing especially," he said. "That one hurt to watch." "You never said anything," I said. "You wouldn't have heard it," he said simply. I thought about that for a moment. He was right. The version of me who turned down Copenhagen had already built too many careful, reasonable justifications around that decision to allow someone else's clarity in. That's the thing about accommodation that people don't mention. It doesn't just take things from you. It also makes you resistant to people who can see what it's taking. Because hearing them would mean having to feel the cost, and you've already decided not to feel the cost, because the cost is the point. We stood there in the dark and cold for another minute. Then he said, "Stockholm suits you." "Yeah," I said. "Come visit Rotterdam next month. I want to show you a project." "Done," I said. About 3 weeks after I arrived in Stockholm, I received a message from Nora. Just a few lines. She told me she had booked Argentina. She told me the new job was going well, better than well, actually. She told me she hoped Stockholm was everything it was supposed to be. And then, at the end of the message, she wrote this. "I know that night in Prague broke something. I know I was the one who broke it. And I know it cost you more than you let me see at the time. I want you to know I'm genuinely sorry for the months I waited instead of saying it sooner. And I want you to know that the thing you said at that table, that curiosity deserves honesty, I've been carrying that with me. It changed how I think about hard conversations." I read it twice. I sat with it for a while. Then I wrote back. I told her Argentina was a good choice, and that Patagonia in particular was supposed to be the kind of place that recalibrates everything. I told her the role was exactly what it needed to be. I told her the apology meant something real to me and that I accepted it without reservation. And then I wrote the part that mattered most to say. The thing that helped me most wasn't knowing you were uncertain. It was realizing, because of what you said, that I had been uncertain too, about whether I was still building a life or just managing around one. Your honesty gave me the permission I didn't know I needed to be honest with myself. So thank you. Even though thank you is a strange thing to say about something painful. She replied within the hour. A single line. Then I'm glad. Even if the glad is mixed with other things. I wrote back. The best kind usually is. She sent back a single word. True. And that was the last message we exchanged. I don't know what she found in Argentina. I don't know what version of herself appeared when she finally had the open, unstructured space she'd been asking for. I don't know if Patagonia was cold enough and enormous enough and old enough to put everything into proper proportion. The way truly large, indifferent landscapes have a way of doing, of making your problems feel smaller not by dismissing them, but by surrounding them with something so much larger that their size simply adjusts. I hope she found something real out there. I hope the trip gave her what she went looking for. I hope she looked at the mountains, and the mountains in that part of the world are genuinely something. I've read, genuinely enormous and ancient and unmoved, and felt whatever she needed to feel. I genuinely hope she's well. Not because I have moved past the loss, because you don't undo 4 years in a few months, and I wouldn't claim to, but because hoping someone well is what you do when you actually love them rather than simply needed them. Those are different things, and I think the difference matters. And I am sitting here in a city I chose, working at something I earned, in a life that has more room in it than I had understood I was missing. I am something I couldn't have called myself with honesty 12 months ago. I am building towards something, not around it, toward it. Something mine. Something that doesn't shrink when I'm not watching. Something that has room for the next version of me, whatever that turns out to look like. That is worth whatever it costs to get here. All of it. Every redirected choice. Every closed window. Every quiet sacrifice I made for a life that ultimately taught me what I actually needed by not becoming it. All of it.